Shalom all. So, Trump gave Hamas an ultimatum. Hamas responded with a yes, but, which was good enough for Trump. Let's see what's going on. Now, I wanted to talk about Iran and the selfie flotilla and other stuff, but Trump and his 21-point plan take priority. And since it's an incredibly busy time here, right after Yom Kippur and right before Sukkot, as well as my father's third yahrzeit, that is the anniversary of his passing, you will all have to forgive me for the shorter, focused episode, which will spend mainly on Trump. So last week, we discussed Trump's 21-point plan, the press conference in which he and Netanyahu presented it, and some thoughts about it. Since then, a lot has happened. Trump and Netanyahu were very firm that the plan was a take it or leave it, no negotiations, as is. But Hamas responded with a yes, but. They don't agree to this and that, and they want clarifications on this and that, and they want to negotiate on this and that. In other words, practically, they said no to everything. Nevertheless, Trump and Netanyahu took their yes as is and are pushing forward to lay the ground to start the 72-hour window in which the hostages are to be released. In other words, they negotiated the withdrawal map needed for Hamas to move the hostages, sent out a team to Cairo, including Minister Ron Dermer, Tal Hirsch, the Major General in charge of the hostage negotiations, and others, like the second in command of the GSS. The U.S. sent Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, and the idea is that on Monday the teams will start negotiating. By the way, it's not in Qatar, but rather in Cairo due to the tension from our strike on Qatar. In any case, the negotiations will start Monday to quickly facilitate the start of the 72-hour time frame for the release of all hostages. Hamas will try to delay the start of the 72 hours. Israel will try to expedite it. And once it starts, 72 hours later, we will either have the hostages, dead and alive, back in Israel, or we will keep pounding Hamas into the Stone Age. Let's go over a quick timeline of the events as follows. Trump and Netanyahu released their 21-point plan. A few days later, Trump said that they'd better respond affirmatively or else. Then Hamas said yes, but 1, 2, 3 conditions that we'll get to in a moment. Trump took that Hamas answer and said, Hamas said yes, Israel should stop advancing and stop attacking. Let's move on with the negotiations and the release of the hostages. Israel then stopped advancing in Gaza City, but continued, of course, responding to Hamas aggression and taking out Hamas infrastructure. So there's still, according to Hamas, the Ministry of Health, about 70 dead yesterday and so on. But supposedly, they've given the command to stop moving forward and advancing. Trump and Mike Huckabee said that the hostages better be released before any further negotiations will occur. Now let's go on and see Hamas's response actually to the different points of Trump's plan. We're not going to go over all the points because Hamas didn't respond to many of them. But let's start. Regarding the immediate ceasefire and halt of hostilities, there was a conditional acceptance. Basically, they say that they're willing to have a ceasefire if it's safe conditions and if guarantees are met and so on and so forth. Regarding the release of all Israeli hostages within 72 hours, Hamas accepted in principle, but the timing and logistics must be negotiated and they are not bound to 72 hours. For example, this morning, one of the heads of Hamas, Yusuf Abu Marzouk, said that it will take them months in order to release all the hostages dead and alive because they have difficulty in reaching the places where they are. Regarding disarmament and destruction of Hamas's military infrastructure, Hamas rejected it and demands the right to self-defense and inclusion within the future national armed structure of Gaza. Regarding deployment of international stabilization security forces, the ISF, it is rejected. Hamas opposes foreign forces controlling Gaza's borders and security. Regarding humanitarian aid, massive humanitarian aid, and the reconstruction program under the UN or neutral oversight with no Hamas involved, Hamas rejected it. It wants the aid, of course, in unlimited amounts, but it wants to be part of the distribution. Regarding a gradual reopening of border crossings and economic corridors with Egypt and Israel, Hamas rejected it. It demands full freedom of movement and trade and no displacement of any people in Gaza. Regarding later political horizon for Palestinian statehood after reforms, Hamas accepted in principle but rejects there being conditions and demands to be guaranteed to be included in it. The bottom line is that Hamas indicated a yes, but in fact laid out multiple conditions and delays for what they claimed to accept and ignored or rejected about 80% of the plan. Now, when I saw this, I said to myself that anyone with eyes would see that they said no, and that would be that. But then Trump very quickly took their answer as a yes, which I found a bit puzzling and troubling, and begs the question of why. If I had to wager, I would guess that it is because he is emphasizing the return of hostages within a short period of time, since that is something that can be judged as successful or not very simply and very quickly. If successful, that would be a big win for him and Netanyahu. And once the hostages are back, God willing, Israel will be in a much stronger negotiating spot for the rest. Also, in theory, Netanyahu will be in a much stronger position internally. I say in theory because the progressive liberal left before October 7th and since continues to find reasons to disrupt and burn down the country protesting against Netanyahu. So if now it's because of the hostages, and before it was the judicial reforms, and before it was supposedly his corruption, and after it'll be something new like the hiring of General Zini as the GSS head, or the firing of Gili Barhav Miari as the district attorney, and so on. But in any case, in theory, he'll be in a stronger position internally. Now, if the hostage return is unsuccessful, in other words, if the Hamas continues to delay and buy for time and so on, it will allow Israel to keep pushing forward militarily while receiving more support from the Arab actors in the region, and possibly also move forward with the Abraham Accord. These actors who have so far been opposed to Israel's action, such as Turkey and Qatar and so on. In any case, time will tell. This still seems like the best deal in the last 2 years, just because the burden of proof is on Hamas at the front end of the deal. And only after the hostages are freed do the rest of the negotiations commence. And even the release of the Arab prisoners, which, since I didn't mention it yet, there will be 250 very serious prisoners whose life sentences being released, and another 1,700 Arabs that were taken prisoners since October 7th being released in exchange for the Israeli hostages dead and alive. Even though that release is contingent on the release of the hostages. Although I would venture a guess that Israel will be flexible and not necessarily wait until the hostages are released. Now briefly about the flotilla. It was a PR stunt. Over 40 boats with hardly any aid, organized and funded by Hamas. The boats were taken by the Navy once they entered the blockade zone, taken peacefully by the way. The participants of the flotilla were taken into custody, and already about a third of them have been flown out. Now, obviously, they should have been much harsher and thrown into prison for a few years to discourage more such flotillas that not only waste the Navy's time and go against international law and so on and so forth, but also allow our enemies to learn our board-in methods in order for when they wish to actually be violent. But anyways, that's that for now. We'll talk about Iran another time. There's a lot going on there and a lot to say about it. So for now, happy Sukkot to you all. God bless you all. Like, comment, share, subscribe, and pray for Israel. Shalom.